In standard Age of Empires 2 games, the Koreans are not considered one of the best civilizations, because they're a pretty slow and sluggish civilization because of their lack of early game bonuses. However, I think that in a deathmatch game, once the Koreans are allowed to get started, they can be one of the most powerful, one of the most deadly civilizations in the entire game. And I think that their Deathball is probably the most dangerous of all. Let's take a look at the Koreans for deathmatch. The first Korean bonus is that villagers have +3 line of sight. It's a bonus that, as a deathmatch player, I don't really care about, but it is nice if you have a lone villager sent out by himself to build something that he'll be able to see enemies approaching a little bit sooner. The next Korean bonus is that stone miners work 20% faster. Now, for most civilizations, this wouldn't be a big deal, because they're only building a couple of castles and walls every now and then. However, for the Koreans, with their other tower-related bonuses and the availability of the Bombard Tower, this is actually a really huge bonus, because it allows the Koreans to rely a little bit more heavily on those towers than other civilizations would, because they're not going to have to use as many villagers to mine those resources. Tower upgrades being free is not a big deal at all for me personally, as a deathmatch player, because we already start with all upgrades being free. However, what this means is that for a normal player, this is going to save you 600 food and wood for the keep and guard tower upgrades. And for the bombard tower upgrade, it's going to save you 800 food and 400 wood. However, what this means is that when you advance to the next age, your towers will be upgraded automatically and instantaneously, which is what I think is what most people view as the main advantage of this bonus. Having tower range being increased by 1 in the castle and 2 in the Imperial Ages continues the trend of pushing you towards using towers as a Korean player in a random match game. As a deathmatch player myself, I don't think that this is very useful because you don't see keeps that often. However, there is one important point I want to make. This only affects keeps. It does not affect bombard towers. The title of the furthest range bombard towers actually belongs to the Turks and not to the Koreans. Yes, I know, it's surprising that the Turks actually did something right, but hey, you gotta let them win somewhere. The next bonus was added in the HD expansions, but this is that fortifications are built 25% faster. What this means is that walls, gates, towers, and castles are built 25% faster. Now, in a previous version, there used to be a bug where fortified walls were not built faster. However, this bug has been fixed. The Korean unique technology, Panokseon, allows the turtle ships to move 15% faster. This is useful for when two navies are fighting each other because the turtle ships are already an incredibly slow unit. However, it doesn't speed them up that much, so it's not that great. However, just be in mind that in the HD expansions, your ships are going to be a little bit faster than they are going to be in the base game. I'm going to talk about Shinkichon and the Korean team bonus a little bit later. So I am now going to quickly look at the tech tree for the Koreans from a deathmatch perspective. And you can see that for the archers, they're not really missing anything super important. They're missing Parthian tactics, which means their heavy cavalry archers aren't going to be anything special. But they do have the hand cannoneer, and they also have the elite war wagon. Now, I already overviewed this unit in depth in a separate video, but basically, the war wagon is a great unit because it's very tanky and because it has high pierce armor, which makes it a great counter to enemy archers, and it's also good against enemy infantry. So, this means that the Koreans have a above average archery range. There's nothing that really stands out that makes them look top tier or anything like that, but they are better than most, in my opinion. Again, it's a similar story for the Korean infantry. They have the champion and the halberdier, but they do miss one of the blacksmith attack upgrades. This means that they have average infantry. But hey, you can't win it all, can you? The Koreans do have access to the hussar and the cavalier for their cavalry, but they are missing both of their last blacksmith upgrades. I am very tempted to say that this is a far below stable. However, I think it's just simply below average, because you could still use the hussar at times against enemy siege. Now, the Korean siege, however, is what they're known for. So let's just take a look at their siege for a bit. They are missing the siege ram and the heavy scorpion, which you would think that would hurt a siege civilization. But they do have siege engineers, they have bombard cannons, and their onagers have more range than their opponent's onagers. The Korean unique tech Shinkichon gives their mangonels and onagers +1 range. This means that a Korean siege onager will have 10 range as opposed to an onager's 8 or an onager with siege engineers 9. And by the way, unless I'm mistaken, every civilization with the siege onager has siege engineers. However, I would like to point out one last thing about their siege, and that is that in the base game, not the HD expansions, the Korean siege onagers have 11 range. This is because in the HD expansions, they nerfed their team bonus. Their team bonus used to be that the onagers had +1 range, but now it's that they have less minimum range. However, this is still a nice bonus, even though it is somewhat of a nerf. As such, even with the HD expansions nerf, the Korean siege is highly above average. I almost want to say that they have the best siege, but I would be ignoring the lack of siege ram. And I think that other players who really want to use their siege to their full potential are going to want to have the siege ram. Now, when you look at a civilization's defenses, I think that there are two aspects of this that you need to look at. The first would be the civilization's buildings. And boy, the Koreans do have good buildings. They have all the university techs, bombard towers, and they have extra stone mining speed, and if you are the type of person who does like to use towers, they have better range, and they're better towers in general. However, I think that the second aspect that you need to look at when you look at a civilization's defenses is how cool those buildings look. For example, it's so obvious that the Korean buildings look way cooler than the Chinese buildings. I mean, there's no comparison there. In all seriousness, though, the second thing that you have to look at is actually what units are available to that civilization that make it hard for the enemy to attack you. And I would argue that the Koreans have also excel in this area because they have better siege onagers, they have all the trash units that they need, they have the war wagon, so it's very hard to attack the Koreans if the Koreans are well defended. And I think that this means that the Koreans' defenses are highly above average. Now, I think that they lack the building health of the Byzantines, and they lack the versatility of that civilization as well, which is probably why I did not give the Koreans the best grade. However, they're very close, in my opinion. Now, my opinion about the Korean dock is probably not going to be the opinion held by many pro players, but I think that they do have a pretty good dock when all things are considered from a deathmatch perspective. First thing to notice is that they have Bracer, they have all their dock techs, and the only thing that they're missing is the Elite Cannon Galleon and the demo ships. However, they do have access to elite turtle ships. Now, I've already did a video about this where I showed that the turtle ships are cost effective from a wood standpoint versus other ships, and that they're definitely population effective. But I failed to really address in that video that I was looking at this from a deathmatch late game perspective. It is true that the Koreans have a pretty bad dock if you're going to look at it from a early game perspective because they have no bonuses, but do take in mind that the turtle ship is a pretty awesome unit when it's used properly. And as such, I think that the Koreans have an above average dock. Now, I'm not going to grade the Korean economy or They are monks, because that's probably not my area of expertise. I wouldn't know how to grade it. But just know that for the economy, the Koreans are missing the last farm upgrade, which is sad. However, the Koreans' units that they create are mainly wood and gold heavy, so this isn't that big of a problem for them. And as far as the monastery goes, the Koreans are missing some important techs, meaning that they can't convert enemy buildings, their units don't die when they are converted, and they cannot convert enemy monks. However, they do have the +3 range, which is really important in my opinion when you're trying to convert enemy elephants. And I think that for this task, the Koreans do just fine. Now I'm going to talk about how you should use the Koreans in a deathmatch game. Now, to start off with, the Koreans don't have any unit creation speed bonuses. They don't have really fast units as their primary units. And what this means is that the Koreans are going to have a pretty mediocre rush. In fact, they have actually one of the worst rushes in a deathmatch game. They're a pretty slow civ. What this means is that the first thing you're going to need to do is build houses. Then the second thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to build barracks. So do those as quickly as you can, and create villagers. And the reason you want to build those houses and barracks is to counter the enemy's rush. Because if the enemy sends cavalry against you, what you're going to need to counter that with would be halberdiers. And if the enemy is a Meso-American civilization, and if they send eagles against you, you're going to need to counter that with champions. It is absolutely of the utmost importance that you counter your enemy's rush. You want to get out of the early game as fast as possible as the Koreans. Once you have those up, you're obviously going to want to start building those units, and then you're going to want to be building bombard towers and siege workshops, because you want to create units that are going to make it really costly for the enemy to try to continue to send units to you. You need them to stop putting that pressure on. Now, if they do stop putting that pressure on you, that's good. You can basically transition to the mid-game. But if they don't stop putting that pressure on you, you're going to need to be very careful. You're going to need to make sure to always have your defense up, and you got to be always creating units to counter your enemy's units. Now, for the mid-game, there's basically one dominant strategy that's used in deathmatch. And this is called the Korean Deathball. So you know that it's a good strategy. And what this is a really destructive combination of Korean war wagons, halberdiers, and onagers. I personally like to add bombard cannons and bombard towers in to that mix of units. And what this does is this creates a situation where every possible unit that the enemy can throw at you is countered excellently by your units. However, depending on what type of civilization you're attacking, you're going to need to adjust the ratios of what units you use. So, for example, if you're attacking an infantry dominant civilization, you're going to need to make more war wagons and more onagers, because those are the units that primarily counter that infantry. You're also going to need to have a better meat shield, because that civilization is also really going to try very hard to get to your onagers. If you're against an archer civilization, you're going to need to make more war wagons and more onagers, again, because you want to counter those archers with those units, and they're great counters. I think that playing as an archer civilization against the Koreans is a deathmatch player's nightmare. Against cavalry, you're going to need a lot more halberdiers, and I would say it's probably a good idea to still have mass onagers, because you're going to need to counter that cavalry. Against heavy siege civilizations, you're going to need to make a little bit less war wagons and probably maybe even a little less halberdiers, because those units are destroyed pretty easily by siege, and instead you're going to need to focus on your own siege, which means incorporating more bombard cannons and more onagers into your army, because your siege for the most part is better than your enemy's siege, and if you defend it well, it can be the best siege in the game. In almost all of these situations, if you add reinforcements to your army, if you create fortifications such as bombard towers and castles, you will be using the Korean infrastructure strategy, which is probably the most effective infrastructure strategy in the game. You are keeping your enemy from retaking any ground that you have created, while giving yourself a line to retreat to. And I think that this is what makes the Koreans so powerful. However, there are particular civilization matchups that I would like to address a little bit more thoroughly. For starters, against Mesoamerican civilizations, replace the halberdiers with champions. These are much better at countering the enemy equal warriors. Now, you might not always be able to afford this, but if you can, it's a really good investment. Against any civilization with elephants, make a lot of monks. These will convert your enemy's elephants if you micro the monks well enough, and this allows you to basically steal your opponent's armies and send it right back to them. Elephants are not particularly great at defeating the Koreans, but they're a lot better than most. Also, if you're going against other infrastructure civilizations, such as the Turks or something like that, who can do infrastructure almost as well as you can as the Koreans, I would probably use way less bombard cannons and actually mass trebuchet, because this is surprisingly effective at destroying enemy towers and bombard cannons if you are being careful to micromanage those trebuchets effectively. Support it with lots of hussars to take out enemy siege, and you're going to be undefeated. The Koreans are very difficult to counter, especially if they've been allowed to kind of boom, and it is of the utmost importance that you get to this immediately. Meaning that you need to rush the Koreans as soon as you can. Even if you don't have a very fast civilization, chances are the Koreans are going to be slower than you are, because they are a slow civilization. However, if your rush kind of fails and the Koreans are able to build up their infrastructure and create that Korean Deathball, you need to have a plan to eliminate them. So the first thing you're going to need to destroy from the Koreans would be their siege. And this is because it is their most deadly and their most expensive part of the Deathball. You can do this by using Cavalry, or you can do it by using your own siege, if you have better micro than the Koreans. Trebuchets are also very effective when you are able to force those siege onagers into a small area. Now, be careful though, because the Koreans do have extra range on their onagers. So I would say do not leave your front lines unattended, because this is how you're going to have big losses. Next piece of advice I would give you is attack the Koreans where they are weak, meaning attack them where they're not defended well, and attack them when they have overextended themselves. So for example, if the Korean onagers move to a position where they're not covered very well by the halberdiers, rush them with cavalry. And if they go past their defensive lines, that's when you need to attack them. If you do this, you will have success. However, I would like to point out that in a deathmatch game, countering the Korean Deathball is really difficult for some civilizations, because they're just not designed for late game battles like this. Sorry Vikings, at least you can do good at water. And so, those are my thoughts about the Koreans. In a 1 vs 1 deathmatch game, I would not call them probably the best civilization, because they're really slow to get started, and once they do get started, they are somewhat reliant on gold, and the enemy can oftentimes outflank you, and it's much more difficult when playing alone. However, in a team game, I would have to say that the Koreans are the best deathmatch civilization once you can fend off your enemy's rush. This is so important when playing as a Koreans player. Fend off your enemy's rush and do not overextend yourself. Don't rush in there and lose your army. However, if you can follow these simple directions, you are going to be almost undefeated as the Koreans play. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you later.